one of the things that's come to my attention as esports Jesus and overlord of everything esports is that the women's counterstrike game is in a bit of a strange place right now. On the one hand, it seems to have been making positive gains in terms of inclusion and attention. Why do I say that? Well, as we'll get to, recently we had Imperial female play against Na'Vi in the Blast bounty system. The way that Valve's VRS invite system kind of works means that it includes the women's circuit as well, and Valve have been quite explicit in saying that a women's team can't be excluded for any reason, and we will calculate the invites and the ranking the way we do it, and we may make adjustments, but what it is what it is. And so you're also going to see Imperial female play at Katowice in about a week, 10 days, something like that. So that's generated a lot of attention. Indeed, Imperial female are the best female team right now. They play for a Brazilian organization, so they get a lot of viewership. And they played Na'Vi, the most popular team in the world in terms of viewership. And so at Blast, Imperial female had 500,000 people watching across all the various platforms, which is crazy. It's crazy in what is ostensibly a group stage game at the first tournament of 2025. The most viewed game is Na'Vi versus a women's team. And not just any women's team, the best women's team. It's the ultimate kind of head-to-head of if you want to have a temperature check on where the women's scene is. And both of those games went close in the first half. They were 7-5 halves in both of them. And then eventually Na'Vi pulled away and won. And look, best will in the world, even if you were forever the supporter of the underdog team, everybody went into it kind of knowing that the chances are Imperial female were going to lose. Now, what a lot of people expected was Imperial female were going to get wrecked, and that isn't what happened. They didn't get wrecked. They gave a good account of themselves. All of the players had good individual moments. It was a bit of a rough game for Anna, who is the best women's player, was the women's player of the year over on HLTV, and is certainly, by the way, someone that could be earmarked for co-ed play in the future, in my opinion. If we do invariably get there, you would look to the best women's players right now, and certainly she's one of them. She's obviously playing in a team with, a veteran, one of the most tenured players. We were laughing about it yesterday because Vaxsucks accused her of cheating, but obviously Zaz is like a Hall of Famer women's player, probably with, pioneers on CLG Red and other players like that. So it was very good to watch. And one of the things that impressed me, actually, was a lot of the viewers engaged in good faith from what I saw. Now, obviously, I watched on Blast's Twitch channel. I was expecting maybe to see some unsavory stuff in the chat. I didn't, but then again, I don't know to what degree the moderators went over the top with, let's put all the word filters on and let's, So I don't know if they really went ham on the moderation or whether it is just that actually the women's team earned some respect from the broader community based on their performance. In fact, we can just have a little look at the numbers. Obviously, both maps, comfortable for Na'Vi, 13-7, 13-8. But overall, in terms of the numbers, this doesn't look a million miles away from what Na'Vi would do to some of the teams that are at the lower end of Tier 1, and probably the margin of victory would have been bigger against some Tier 2 teams. I don't think anybody could really dispute that. Now, I've seen some people say, and there's probably an element of truth to this, that Na'Vi kind of felt they could take their feet off the accelerator, they didn't have to really try too hard, and then as soon as things were a little bit close and they were worried about being embarrassed, that's when they pulled away with the game. And look, there is a degree of truth in that, in the sense that if you remember when Cadian lost that 1v1 to Giuliano and how much that affected and impacted on his career, because unfortunately the reality is there's going to be a level of mockery aimed at any individual male or men's team that lose to a women's team. The first high-profile men's team that does indeed lose to a women's team, or even a team with a woman in it, is going to become a bit of a meme, just due to the nature of the immaturity of esports fans and the CS community at large. But there were some good individual moments. There was some sick plays. Kat Deagle immediately springs to mind, where she absolutely fucking banged out Wonderful. There was like some people were trying to create a little drama on Telegram about Wonderful because apparently he fucking like said the Ukrainian word for slut, which, you know, look, doesn't necessarily mean it was aimed at his opponent. Even if he did say it, some people said, "Oh, that's lip reading. He's actually just suka," is what he said. So, you know. Who knows? It seems a bit silly. I can't really imagine that the Na'Vi guys would be mean-spirited like that or say anything disparaging about the women's players. Indeed, JL, I thought, let me bring up the tweet, thought he was very respectful in the aftermath, and he said, if you still have any doubts about Imperial female not belonging to the scene, you're just a hater. They made us sweat. They shoot very strong. Put some respect on their name. They made it here fair and square. Give them a couple of years, more experience, and they'll be a threat. Someone in the replies said, "What do you mean a threat? Like lol, you know, like mocking them." And JL went on to say a threat is them winning a game against the top 5 teams. They can beat tier 2 teams now. Imagine if they had invites to many more tournaments. They would gather experience way faster. A game against a tier 2 team would have been easier. That's coming from JL himself. So it's a very respectful thing to say. Now, cynics out there, and look, you know me, I cover everything from all angles, although I'm going to make my views pretty clear. Cynics out there will say, well, of course JL has got to say this. There's a political imperative to say these things, to be gracious in victory over your women's opponents. And if you want to get some good boy points from all of the people that have that shit lib agenda or whatever, or woke mind virus or whatever nonsense we're calling it this week, then obviously this is the type of thing you would say. I also do think JL could have said nothing. So, I mean, I don't think that argument holds up. He's absolutely under no obligation to come out and give full-throated praise to his opponents in victory. And certainly, what he's saying here seems to be above and beyond what would even be expected. I believe it's genuine and comes from a genuine place. And also just knowing JL a little bit, not immensely. I think we've had like 2 passing conversations, but, you know, I hear things and blah blah, being involved in the scene. He does seem to be a type of guy that, like, you know, there's more to him than meets the eye, let's put it that way. He might not come across as the most thoughtful individual, but he's someone who definitely does think about these things, and I don't think he could be compelled to say anything he didn't believe. Nor also do I think is he so high-minded that he is political and Machiavellian when it comes to the Twitter game. So there's a flip side to the coin, and that is, obviously, it remains true that the VRS system as stands is creating an inequality in the invites. And unfortunately, that inequality is probably going to be one of those things people tiptoe around. Again, I don't care. You can't cancel me at this point. I've bottomed out. I've been to the bottom. And now I'm back. And now I don't care. So I'm just going to point out what it is. The inequality isn't what you think it would be ordinarily. The inequality, of course, is that you have ESL Impact, which is its own closed circuit for women only, and it generates VRS ranking points based on its prize money. And so the prize money that it generates means they get points that puts them towards the overall rankings, which include the men's team, but those men's teams are excluded from competing in ESL Impact, obviously, because they're men. And so this gives the women's teams an opportunity to accrue points for the VRS that men's teams don't. And this is obviously unfair. Now, I don't care. I don't fucking care. A lot of people do. I don't. I just can't get motivated about it. I'm going to explain all of my reasons for that. So I've talked about this before. And by the way, I know there's going to be some chuds out there who go, "Oh, Mr. Competitive Integrity doesn't care about competitive integrity anymore, so he could score some points from the Liberals because he is, of course, the CEO of gay," which is me. Bisexual, of course. Bisexual the whole time. No, here's why I don't care. So first of all, I've talked about this for a long time. I see women's only spaces in sports as being something worth preserving. I'm older than a lot of other people in the space. I actually remember, growing up in the 80s and the early 90s and seeing various maligned groups in society that had inequalities put against them, whether it was the LGBT community or women's rights. I saw how hard people fought to get these spaces and these opportunities for themselves. And it wasn't lost on me as a child raised by a single mother exactly just how important the women's struggle essentially was. So for me, you can summarize it like this. First of all, women's spaces are there to encourage women to participate in activities that are typically male-centric and dominated by men, but also in an environment where they aren't going to have to enter into a male-centric space. The other thing is, in the same way that we have women's only night in a gym, we do that because some men are just weird. And I've talked about this a lot. It's not like I'm a fucking male feminist by any stretch of the imagination. I find some of the misandry that's associated with modern way feminism quite repugnant. But equally as well, I can kind of vibe with it if there was... If you were someone that had to kind of walk around planet Earth knowing that 50% of the population could willingly harm you, rape you, kill you, and they would be physically empowered in a way you're not and capable of doing that, that would probably make me a bit insular. And then on top of that, when you are entering into these spaces and men are either hitting on you because they're trying to, sexualize something when you don't want it to be sexual, or simply just dominating you in a way that's not giving you sufficient practice, it's not great. And I can talk about this experience from kind of a gym perspective. Later we'll be talking about boxing. So combat gyms are a very good example. I'm sure now you used to have a local boxing gym that's now been repurposed as a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym. And if you remember, of course, what those gyms used to do to bring a lot of money in was they would offer self-defense classes for women. Women would go to the self-defense nights, learn basic martial arts and self-defense techniques, but then if they got into it and they had a penchant for it, if you like, they would eventually graduate to coming and learning the discipline firsthand, and in which case it's co-ed. And now, no guy, by the way, at a combat gym is ever going to allow full contact violence between a man and a woman, but in a jiu-jitsu gym, men and women quite regularly do roll together. In a boxing gym, you will have pads sparring between men and women. These are not taboo subjects. This is kind of where it goes. And so for me, I've always seen the practice in the women's only environment to ultimately be the end goal is to elevate you into co-ed should there be a sufficient pathway to do it. And so that's always been my belief about why there needs to be women's spaces for sports and by extension esports. All of the rhetoric around, but there's no difference in esports between men and women. They should all just play. That science completely disproves this. They even have gender barriers in chess. They have women's only spaces in chess. It's just there are fundamental differences. We are a dimorphic species, and so as a result, certain things aren't we're not going to be capable of the same things. Men aren't capable of some things women are. Women aren't capable of some things men are. It's not controversial to say these things. And so when you take that picture holistically, have a women's space, have a women's counterstrike league. I think it's a great thing. I definitely hope that what it helps do is incubate a generation of talent, some of whom are then able to go and play alongside men, or, like is happening with Imperial Female, maybe we get a women's team that can go and make history by beating a men's team at a competitive event. It's not the most popular opinion, bizarrely. It's probably not feminist enough for the feminists. It certainly isn't male-centric enough for the MRAs. But that's what I believe. And I think I'm kind of right. I think being in the middle on this, respecting women's spaces, and understanding why they exist, but also seeing them as a pathway to co-ed competition seems to be reasonable. I don't think I'm being sexist, but no doubt someone can come and chastise me and correct me a little bit later. Now, I will say the complaint is valid, and I don't know about how they accrue the VRS points, and I don't know if Valve are going to address that, and I don't know if Valve are going to change that. They probably should. They should probably make the women's circuit a little bit less weighted, because it is crazy to think that if you were to go on the official Valve rankings, in fact, we can take a look at the Valve rankings, because they are done in association with HLTV. As you scroll down, here we go. As you scroll down, you're going to see, okay, this all makes sense. But according to the Valve rankings, Imperial female is a better team than Imperial. You've also got Furia female, ranked at 24th in the Valve rankings. And so that there, just being fair and reasonable, that there isn't accurate. The Navi Javelins, which no longer exist, sadly, as we're going to get to. There's two ways to look at this. You can look at that and go, no, this is a good thing, because now the women are going to get invited to the men's events, and that means that they're going to get more experience, they're going to get better, and eventually that ranking might well be a fair reflection of where they are. Maybe you do feel that way. I'm not sure I agree. I think sometimes it can be true that something is good, but also unfair at the same time. And I think that's definitely elevating them. I don't believe for a second Imperial female is better than Bet Boom. I don't believe Furia female is better than, I don't know. Okay, some of these teams do suck ass. But, would Furia female beat this Fnatic team? I don't know, maybe. No, look, obviously I don't think they would, just to be fair and truthful with everybody and not play to the gallery. So, but would they beat teams down here? Would they beat whoever Unity are, or, Cybershock, or maybe not online, or, Apogee, maybe. And we're probably going to have opportunities to find out over the course of this year in 2025. So I do think the VRS, they probably just need to tweak it a little bit. We knew 2025 was going to be rough in terms of the invites. Now, I'll refer you to something Electronic said. Electronic, obviously, of Virtus Pro. He said, this was in eScore News, female teams always wanted to be invited to male tournaments to show themselves. Finally, this time has come. And Virtus Pro player Electronic commented on the invite of Imperial female roster to the top tier CS2 tournaments. He thinks this might be a good chance for the girls to prove themselves. The Rifler spoke about it during a Q&A session with fans on YouTube. It will be interesting to see the women's teams. They are great. They got an invite. These teams always wanted to be invited to male tournaments where they can show themselves. Finally, this time has come. And I want to say, again, I think it's fantastic to see people like Electronic, people like JL, being so supportive of their female compatriots, their female competitors, their peers. I certainly didn't necessarily expect it. You have to understand, I'm from a time where when women played in StarCraft tournaments and guys were going up against them, they used to say some outrageous things. StarCraft was a bit of a weird scene in the sense that the people that played that game were all intellectuals, and yet what came out of their mouths while they were playing a game or after a game when they lost was some of the most racist, vitriolic. You just couldn't believe these people were saying it. You were just exposed to it all of the fucking time when you were working in that scene. And obviously, maybe it was just 2010s, 2011 internet. I don't know, but it was pretty wild. And certainly, there was at least one scandal where, and I won't name the players involved, but obviously you can look this up if you're really interested. But a player made a joke because obviously in Eastern European cultures, the word rape is associated with rapacious rather than the act of sexually violating someone. And they said, oh, they were playing a woman in a tournament, and they said, I'm going to rape my opponent. And that, of course, got them disqualified for saying that, and understandably so. I mean, that kind of, that kind of language is certainly not what you want to hear if you're a woman going into a male space competing in a male tournament, obviously. So just to put it out there, I think the male professionals have shown an incredible level of welcomeness and maturity, and I'm pleasantly surprised. Because that hasn't always been the case in esports. People aren't always thoughtful about the difference in the genders and how certain types of banter might affect people differently, you know? So, there's another counter-argument to this point, and that is that women have always been able to go to the male tournaments. There is no such thing as a male tournament in CS. All they had to do was win the qualifiers. The problem, of course, there is that they would have to go through the gauntlet of typically a qualifier for a qualifier to get to the big event, because they wouldn't even necessarily be invited to a closed qualifier because there was no formal recognition of how we would kind of integrate the ranking systems of the best women's team and the lower end of the male scene. There wasn't a mechanism to do it until the VRS came along and essentially blew it open. And I think that's been a problem down the years in terms of encouraging interplay. But it's got to be said, they weren't necessarily winning those qualifiers, and that suggests that they're not ready. I remember when I was working at E-League, we had this suggestion, which I was adverse to. I opposed it when it came up in the executive body. So here you go. This is where you get to call me a bigot and a sexist. One of the executives was very keen on the idea of having a women's team, and it was when CLG Red were the big team, and obviously they had a great social media presence. They were winning all the women's trophies. They were a North American lineup, so they ticked all of the boxes for television in America. And people were like, why don't we just have one of the 16 invites go to CLG Red? And I said, and obviously this was like 2016, 2017, and I said, I don't think you want to do that, because I don't think it would be the advertisement for the women's game you think it would be. And they were like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, if they lose, 16-2, 16-3 every single fucking map, and that's what we're putting on television every week, and it's just this like meme of how bad are the women's team going to lose this week, I don't think that helps progress the women's game at all. I think that's kind of outrageous, not to mention we're putting them up against the 15 best teams in the world on a weekly basis to a televised audience. And you can only garner so much experience from crushing defeats. You can learn anything from a defeat if it's sort of competitive and close. If you just get absolutely fucking brutalized, then no, there's not really a lot to take away from that, except you probably shouldn't have been competing against the person that battered you in the first place. So I was kind of like, yeah, let's not do this now. And I sort of stand by that decision. I think there's a world of difference between what the VRS is functionally achieving by having the women's teams get into these events and what would have happened had CLG Red just been playing against those teams at that time in Counter-Strike. I also do think the women's game has come a long way since 2016. I don't think that's like a great surprise to anyone. There's been a lot of initiatives, a lot of development, a lot of interest, not to mention in a parallel world we've had esports that have integrated women's programs successfully. Like, say what you want about Riot Games, but Riot's game changes in Valorant has been fantastic, and it's done a lot for the women's scene. It's done a lot for their scene. I think we've had 2 women now that have come from game changers that have gone to play on co-ed rosters. Not to mention that one of the best coaches is Potter, who came from Counter-Strike herself, a kind of women's Hall of Famer as well, and now winning, the highest level of trophies over in Valorant. So it's been, Riot have absolutely done something CS has never really achieved, which is to have a healthy, integrated scene. Now, look, you're going to see clips from time to time, and I honestly sometimes do think, I've certainly seen some clips that are dubious, that it's like a streamer who and they keep posting the same clip of like them being abused by a guy in a game, and then people are like doing the internet detective thing, and they're like, wait, but you've got that person on your friends, and things like this. I don't think you should conflate the average asshole in matchmaking with a genuine barrier to entry to competitive play. Because, look, yes, some immature, incel-esque guys are going to tell you to get back in the kitchen. They're going to tell you, you fucking shouldn't be playing. They're going to hear you on mic, and they're going to say, oh, we've got a girl, we've already lost. They're just losers. They're just fucking born losers. It's as simple as that. I've never understood it. I've never understood the incel mindset, because it's like, here you have a woman playing a video game you like, which don't you want to meet women that share your interests, get to know them, maybe date some of them? Like, don't you care about any of that? No, apparently they don't. They drive them out. They drive them out, and then they go, why will no woman like me? It's like, well, I don't know, guys. Kind of see a solution to your problem here. It's called don't be a fucking asshole. But, again, I'm from a different time. I'm a thinker, But I am sympathetic when I see those clips. But also I think, how bad is it really? I have no insight into that world because I'm a guy. I think it's sad when I see things like voice-changing software is being marketed and sold on the basis of, if you're a girl gamer and you want to hide your voice, buy this software. I think that sucks, that's a real thing. I think it's fair to say that for the pros, for the women that are good enough to go pro, I wouldn't let any of that put you off. CS is just a weird space in the sense that a lot of fucking angry losers from countries that don't necessarily have the best in terms of infrastructure and opportunity, a lot of angry losers play these video games, and angry losers are going to just fucking, look, like, last time I played CS, I got called the N-word and told that I love President Zelensky and all this other stuff, and it's like, this diatribe just happened apropos of nothing, and it's like, well, fucking, I don't know, guys, like, I just don't know why any of this is happening. I'm just trying to play a fucking game. So I get it. I'm right there with you. But if you're good enough to go pro, pay attention to your fellow pros. Pay attention to your male colleagues. I think there's a lot of support and a lot of consideration out there, and a lot of people willing these teams to do well when they eventually get into the male tournaments. When that first victory does inevitably come, equally, I will hope the community doesn't deride and mock the loser too much, just so we can kind of accelerate normalizing this type of competition. We'll wait and see anyway. So far so good. It sounds like the women's scene is having an uptick. So why then is this happening, right? Na'Vi Javelins were obviously one of the big teams. So they were used as a bit of a political stunt, if I'm being honest. Again, this is one of those things that people probably don't like when I say it. I think calling the women's team Javelins was a bit tasteless. For those that don't know, the context there is the Javelin missile is a particular anti-tank missile which was being sold to Ukraine, and its resistance against the Russians, which is fine, by the way, like, obviously defend your nation. But calling a woman's team that might not want to have anything to do with the politics, because, as you can see, it was a mixed lineup. None of the players were Ukrainian when they were called that name. You've got a Portuguese and a French person in there. They might not have a strong enough feeling, and they're going up against, for instance, there's Russian players out there, and I've said one of the things that I hate in the world of esports right now is I know that the vast majority of the Russian competitors are cosmopolitan Russians that don't like the Russian state, don't like Putin, don't support the war in Ukraine, and it's just that it's very hard for them to say anything about it because they live under a despot. That's how that works. So when you essentially politicize a team, you're putting that label onto the competitors, and then when they go and they lose to a women's team that has Russian competitors in it, Ukrainian fans look at that, they see the Javelins defeated by a Russian lineup. It's not a good feeling. And so what do those Ukrainian fans do? You're letting our country down, you're letting our nation down, how dare you lose to the Russian dogs, etc., etc. I saw a lot of hate comments aimed at these gals that they just did not fucking deserve at all because they were put into a fucking cauldron just over a name for a team. So just I never liked that. This could have been anything, but whatever. So they've dropped that team anyway, despite all of that stuff. The Na'Vi Esports Club has decided to leave the women's competitive Counter-Strike. At the moment, the business model for that esports segment seems unsustainable and does not allow for long-term planning. And you go, okay, well, that's weird, because what I've been told is that these organizations were getting a stipend to essentially have a women's team and entering it into the ESL Impact. And as we know, ESL Impact is generating enough prize money that the women's team are now climbing the VRS rankings and getting invited to more prestigious tournaments, which means more prize money. And not only that, people seem to have forgotten this, in 2025, if your team attends one of these events, you're getting paid for being there. They all have these team organization incentive programs. In some cases on the ESL circuit, they've kept prize money at $300,000, but they're announcing it as like a $1.3 million tournament, or sorry, a $1 million tournament, and $700,000 is going straight to the organizations. Which, by the way, Valve, clamp down on that, please. So why wouldn't you want to have an opportunity for another team? And I'll tell you, it's because obviously Na'Vi, you can't have your women's team and your men's team play at the same event. And what's happened is basically they've become like the academy teams. Remember how between 2016 and 2018, before we had the rise of the academy leagues with WePlay and what have you, there wasn't a point in having an academy team anymore. We had to get rid of them because of all of the conflict of interest things that people cared about back then, which is, how can I have an academy team play the main team at a tournament when I can just rig that outcome and guarantee that my team wins, my main team, the team I want to go to the tournament? We can't allow that, so there was nowhere for academy teams to play, so everyone dropped their academy teams. Now I strongly suspect, because the women are co-ed in with the guys, and the only thing external to that seems to be ESL Impact, why would I pay for two teams when only one can get to the events, and we're guaranteed to be at all of the events? There's zero chance Na'Vi's going to miss any event unless it's voluntarily in 2025. But it wasn't just Na'Vi. Who else bailed? I mean, this shouldn't surprise you, but they made a big deal about picking up the team. This is obviously Team Sticker Money, TSM. They got rid of their CS Impact roster. Out, gone. They announced that they were done. ENCE had something called the Athena program, is what they were calling their women's division. They've put it on hold. You can see here, ENCE Athena, our women's CS roster was founded in September 2023. Over the past year in the scene, our Athena roster has participated in 3 seasons of the ESL Impact League. And now, after careful consideration, we've decided to put the ENCE Athena program on pause. With this, we part ways with those members, blah, blah, blah. And you can see, look, they even put this here: the goddess of wisdom, warfare, and handicraft. Once again, ENCE's branding, just everything about ENCE is great. I fucking love ENCE. What a great org. Love them. Actually using Athena, that's just fucking chef's kiss. Great. Excellent. Way better than Javelins. Take notes, Na'Vi. I already included this in my annual Astralis is still a mess video, but it's worth mentioning again. Astralis, that used the women's team for the big publicity stunt of saying, Valve, put women's models free to play in CS2. By the way, don't disagree, but fuck Astralis. And the women's team had to come out and say, yes, women aren't being represented. Actually, we just want to play CS Astralis. Can you not use this for a publicity stunt? Oh, you are going to use this for a publicity stunt? Okay, well, we'll do the publicity stunt. You won't then just fire us after the... Oh, you're firing us after the publicity stunt. Okay, right, my bad. And so Astralis put the women's team on hold. Our good friend of the stream, Casper Strauber, said, I'm saddened that today we must say goodbye to our 5 talented and ambitious female players. We have seen a team and 5 players who have continuously evolved, and we have been proud and happy to support them at Astralis. Unfortunately, we must acknowledge that the changes in the industry surrounding the Women's League no longer allow us to manage a women's team in the way we believe it should be run at this time. It's been a great pleasure to work with these players, and I hope that at some point in the future we may explore the possibility of developing a women's project again and the right ambitions and opportunities. Nevertheless, we express our immense gratitude to the entire team and anyone who supported the team over the past years in shaping and creating the Astralis W project, because that's what they called their team. That's kind of whack, but not as whack as Javelins. So this is one of those where it's like, I mean, it is Astralis. They kind of just fucking suck as an org. They can't do anything right. They need to have a big managerial shake-up. Even Nicola Nyholm's had enough and peace the fuck out. But that's that. So all of which is to say, people are withdrawing their support for women's teams for a variety of reasons, but the prevalent sentiment seems to be there just isn't a business model for it that makes sense. And that's just a bit of a head-scratcher because, as you can see, they have the opportunities now to go to the male events, the main events, I guess would be a better term, if their male counterparts aren't being sent by the organization. By the way, it's not a given that maybe Imperial might want to send the female team, over the men's if both were to qualify. Who really knows? But the prevailing sentiment just seems to be economically it can't work. And it's like, well, I don't know. I've looked at the women's salaries. The women's salaries are pretty much with a few exceptions for the obvious big name players, but the women's salaries are pretty much where men's CS salaries were in like the end of 2014. Let's put it that way. A lot of these women aren't earning a lot of money. They're not being paid a living wage to be a professional player. And so I know that these teams are run cheaply from a salary perspective. From a resource perspective, they're only engaging and using resources at your training facilities or compounds or whatever you want to call it. They're only using things you already have for your men's team. You have to get some extra PCs maybe sometimes. Who knows? But ultimately, it's just travel and hotels, and increasingly tournament operators foot the bill for that. So it's very hard for me to understand just how much of a money sink a women's team actually is, if that's the argumentation for not having one. And when you looked at I was like, well, the announcement for ESL Impact must be pretty bleak. If all of these people are bailing out prior to the announcement or shortly after the announcement, then I must have missed something. Because when you look at the ESL Impact outline for the 2025 circuit, this looks like it's the best circuit they've ever had. So maybe I've missed something. Maybe there's something I don't understand. One of the things I'm going to do, mainly out of my own self-interest and to educate myself on the topic, I am going to organise a round table. I'm going to get probably B-Dog and Lucy Loose, and I'd like to get a player. I'd like to get a woman's player. And we'll have a round table and talk about it, because I am intrigued to see which way the wind is blowing on this. Anyway, it says here, today we are excited to share the details about ESL Impact in 2025. This includes information about the seasonal club incentive. And when you look down here, it says we're committed to supporting clubs through our continued investment in women's Counter-Strike. Our annual financial contribution of $700,000 will be dedicated to clubs participating in league seasons throughout 2025. To encourage creativity, storytelling, and content quality, we are launching an incentive structure focused on short-form and long-form content creation. This program will also include a performance-based reward element for team organizations, tied to their results in season finals. And so when you look at it, each season is going to have a split of $350,000, and the distribution will be $100,000 for teams ranked in the top 8. For teams ranked in the top 6 for short-form content, and I'm guessing the metric there is views, you get $125,000, and the long-form content will also do the same. If you're in the top 6 for views, you get $125,000. Now, maybe, because I'm sure you recognize this incentive program, right? This is a direct lift from the Esports World Cup. That's what they do. You have the prize money, and then you have the money that's dedicated for all the social media outreach. It's why all of those fucking Esports World Club Cup program recipients won't shut the fuck up on social media about how they're getting the bag. And so they're doing that here because obviously Savvy Games Group own ESL. So the $125,000 being shared across the top 6 for both the short form and long form content, there's 2 arguments you can make here. You can go, oh, that's a really good idea, because if you made a really compelling piece of content about the women's team, but your women's team was shit and had no chance of finishing in the top 8 at the season finals, then they can still get a cut of money, and it makes it worth having a women's team. The other argument is, and it's the counter argument to that, if you're already a popular organization, your content will be popular. It's going to be hard to beat Imperial Female or Na'Vi Javelins if they were still in existence, for instance, in terms of reach, because they put it out on their massive socials. People engage with it, people click on it, you turn in the clicks, you're at the top, you're taking a cut of money that isn't performance related, but instead is leveraging your huge reach. And very often it's kind of a tandem thing, isn't it? If you're a good team, you're a popular team. Esports fans are very fickle. They want to win championships. It's like all those dickheads that were fucking Astralis teams for like 3-4 years. And you see them posting now, and they've all got like Team Liquid fucking flair and garbage like that. Or all the Astralis fans that weren't really Astralis fans, they were Device fans, and they went over to be NIP fans for a few weeks before Device went on the bench. It's kind of, it's like esports fans are fickle, and so they go where the winners are. And so if that's the argument you want to make, then I could understand if you were a smaller team that had no chance of finishing in the top 8, and in particular no chance of winning an ESL Impact, maybe it simply isn't worth entering the competition to begin with. But then again, I don't see how that would apply to some of the names we're talking about, which have been top 8 finishes in ESL Impacts in the past. So the appearance is that the money just simply isn't enough. But that is the most money I've seen attributed to a women's tournament in my esports lifetime. I think back to like the 1.6 women's competitions that used to be held at the Esports World Cup and stuff like that. And just for context, by the way, when you went to the Esports World Cup, the ESWC, the Source tournament was, they put the women's 1.6, they loved 1.6 so much more than Source and CSGO. The 1.6 tournament would be on the main stage. Even the women's 1.6 tournament, while the CSGO and the Source people, they just fuck you. So, just putting that out there. But there was big money involved in that, but these were like one-off tournaments. They weren't committing to like however many seasons in a year. This is a lot of money going into the women's game. And this is for the players. The annual prize pool being $300,000 split into $150,000 a season. Obviously, Orgs take a cut of that as well. So the circuit itself looks pretty decent as well. You can see you've got open qualifiers to get into the league. You have the league. You've got it's going to be held at the Dallas event, the finals there. And similarly again, and then in the Stockholm event, which will be ESL Pro League, you're going to have the finals there. And I think that's a really good idea to help get eyeballs onto it, onto the games. Like, oh, if we're watching the tournament anyway and the women's game is on, well, yeah, maybe I'll tune in for that. We're going to get to viewership in a moment. One thing I do just want to tell people while we're talking about the women's game, and I've got this on very good authority, you know me. Now, this is the word on the street. That's the phrase I use to say, if I was 100% on it, or I felt like it was worth typing up, I would just put a report on it, put my byline on it, and then you know it's true, because I've never been wrong when I've done that, and I won't do that unless I'm 100%. But this is like 99%. And so, as a result, I'll just say it on this stream, one of the things that ESL, well, mainly Savvy, I guess, they wanted to put the Impact finals on in Riyadh. They wanted it to be done as part of the Esports World Cup, because again, it's a sports washing exercise, and they wanted to show how like fucking progressive we really are in Saudi. So even though there's, you know, women's rights activists in prison for years just down the road from where the tournament takes place, don't worry about it. Look, they drive now, they play now. You know, that was going to be that, but there was people involved managerially inside of the Impact League that were resistant to that idea and said absolutely not. But I think on a long enough time scale, if the Impact League continues to attract big name orgs, do expect to see the finals in Riyadh one year. It goes without saying. This is talking about how it complies with Valve's new tournament structures, sets all of the dates and everything else, so not really necessary to read. So I look at that, and okay, let's forget ESL are a Saudi-owned sports washing enterprise, just for the moment. Let's just forget that. Oh, by the way, let me just get this for you, since as we're talking about they drive now. Obviously, for those who don't know, I started the phrase they drive now as a ridicule and mockery of the people that have essentially turned a blind eye to the plight of women in Saudi Arabia because of the Saudi Arabian state's attitude towards women's rights and female independence. And one of the big excuses they use is that Mohammed bin Salman is really a progressive, despite there having been more state executions than there have been in decades, many of these people having confessions beaten out of them, and some of them were executed because they live an alternative lifestyle, whatever that means. Anyway, people in esports have unironically said to me, "Oh, the things are getting better in Saudi Arabia, Richard. They can drive now. Did you hear about this?" They do the Jay Leno to me. Did you hear it? Did you see it? Did you see it? Did you see it? And then they'll link to a fucking article about how women are driving for the first time in Saudi Arabia without, chaperones or anything like that. And they drive now. And so what I did is I don't know if you remember one of the god-awful new Star Wars movies. I think it was the third one. Oh, no, it must have been the second one. But the Rian Johnson one. Anyway, I'm not too sure, but there's that scene where like a stormtrooper has a jetpack, and John Boyega turns around and goes, "They fly now, they fly now, they fly now," and it's just really embarrassing and terrible writing. So I took "they fly now," turned it into "they drive now," and that's just become a catchphrase in esports. Every time you see some hypocrisy about the Saudi Arabian state and how they treat women, they drive now. Haven't you heard? They drive now. And so somebody made this movie poster for me, which is just fantastic. There it is. It's drive, but they drive now. So, good old Ryan. This will probably be coming to a thumbnail next time I'm ranting about Saudi Arabia and their human rights record. So, whoever did this, by the way, on the Rich Cord, fucking love you for it. If you're not on the Rich Cord, you've got to get on the Rich Cord. You type in !Discord in the chat right now if you're not a member, and join there, because we do all these memes, and you get to see my live reactions to crazy news, and you get to suggest news stories that I might want to talk about, and everything that I post publicly gets posted there first. So get on the Discord if you haven't already, and you too can participate in memes like that before I make them public. Anyway, ignoring that, this is a great initiative. I wish something like this had existed 10 years ago, and maybe we'd be in a different place. Again, I'm not saying that the women's games have been ignored, but they've certainly been underfunded and underserved. And maybe that's just straight economics, and that's the nature of the marketplace. But this is a great initiative. I wish it wasn't tainted. But I'm very perplexed as to why more and more people aren't participating in it. And I strongly suspect it might be something to do with this, because when teams like Na'Vi are saying it doesn't make any financial sense, well, the numbers, Mason. Let's have a look. So this is esports charts. This is the last season, season 6, and this is the overall viewing statistics. Now, viewing statistics aren't the be-all and end-all of an esports tournament, but it does raise some concerns, because you can see its highest peak was 15,000, which isn't great. Its average viewers was 4,300. And when you look at when they achieved it, it was Imperial versus Furia in a Brazilian derby, or Furia versus Na'Vi. And look, there's obviously going to be some mitigating circumstances. There's going to be other tournaments overlapping and things like this. But the bottom line is, this viewership, it hasn't necessarily been trending up. It's been a slog. They're not getting a lot of viewers per games. And if you look at the production value, and they've got fantastic talent that do commentary over there that obviously make money. They've got their own studio in Sweden. It's ESL production, so it is cookie cutter, but it's still decent. It's above the average esports event. That's a lot of money to pump into it, and so the numbers probably don't make a lot of sense for ESL. ESL are probably doing this more as an offshoot of the money they get from Intel, because Intel are very into the idea of doing things to help promote women in gaming and tech spaces. You probably got the fact that they're doing this because it helps with the sports washing enterprise, with the Saudi aspect to it. All of which is to say, and obviously there is the long play, which is just straight economics. And the long play is this: women, they spend now, guys. There's 50% of the planet we're not tapping into in esports enough. Let's create something, and then we can get merchandise sold to those people as well. As Michael Jordan said, Republicans buy sneakers too. So I look at that and I think, yeah, that's tough. That's hard. I don't know why it doesn't get more viewership, but I actually think there'll be a trickle-down effect. The more the women play against the men's teams over in VRS, the more I think attention will come to the women's league. Like, they certainly, Imperial Female, won some fans and won some hearts and minds. There was a lot of people cheering them on. And if you go to the Reddit thread about the game, it's a lot of positive comments and a lot of people being downvoted for saying unkind things. Not just downvoted a little bit, downvoted like they were me. Boom. All the way to the bottom. So it's certainly got the potential, a rising tide raises all ships, but there are some concerns around the overall health of the women's game. And a lot of women competitors are saying we are struggling right now. It's very, very hard. Orgs don't want to keep the teams on. There's not a lot of opportunities. We don't get a lot of practice opportunities as a result of that. And outside of the haves and there's way more have-nots than there is haves. So B-Dog, who obviously does commentary for the women's game, he put a video out today, funnily enough. It was the thing that sold me on actually turning the stream on today. I was just going to enjoy the inauguration and do the dance to YMCA. I was just going to have a good time. And then B-Dog put this out, and I was like, I've already kind of semi-scripted a video about the state of women's counterstrike, and I want to make some more content around that. And he put this video out, and I'm not going to play all of it because obviously I've got too much respect for B-Dog. He's a cool dude, and he did a pretty good summary, which is basically this part here. But he also has some player interviews with players, and they're giving their perspective, and some of it's stuff that I go, okay, sure, and it makes sense, and some of it I'm kind of like, is that true? I don't know. But what I would say is, I'm not going to play those interviews. I would urge you to give it a listen. Go to B-Dog's YouTube channel. As you can see, he's only got 83 subscribers. He's better than that. So if you want to throw him a subscribe, I'm sure he'd appreciate it. And certainly, let's get this video that he's clearly put a lot of effort into. Let's get this at least having a few thousand views. So, but I'm just gonna play these 3 chapters here, which is going to make up approximately 3 minutes of footage. And I think it's interesting, to hear his perspective as someone that's been involved with ESL Impact. So
in the scene, and this will just stunt development of the scene as a whole. If you look at recent roster manias for Counter-Strike over the last competitive seasons, for example, you can see that the entire team structure can shift very easily, because there's a deep pool of players that you can look into, scout from not only tier 1, but the hundreds of teams that make up the competitive conversation, and find a diamond in the rough. Or you could even recruit a player that's got experience playing within tier 2 and tier 3 and take a gamble on them. And if it doesn't work, then you could potentially just make another switch later down the line. Within women's Counter-Strike, you don't have this luxury, because the players to choose from goes from tens of thousands to hundreds. By having less options to choose from, this means that the growth and the development of rosters will have a much longer life cycle to improve. Organizations picking up women's CS teams happened quite a lot once ESL Impact came onto the scene in 2022, and having an organization that is championing women is extremely important to the space, because it creates role models within the women's scene and shows that you can play the game, and there is definitely a pathway for you. No matter what country you're from, what region you play Counter-Strike within, there is a way for you to rise to the top. And seeing these women representing the same organizations that have a deep and rich history within the landscape of Counter-Strike not only imprints a long-term goal, but delivers reassurances that you can make it as a pro. Having role models within the women's CS scene will help encourage other women who have played a little bit before, or maybe have just watched an event, come and play and grow, which would then lead to the player pool becoming that little bit deeper. You've even seen legacy players within the Counter-Strike scene, such as Giuliano and Zaz, return to compete within ESL Impact after playing within the Valorant Game Changers. It isn't just about new players being inspired to play, it's also about piquing the interest of players that have previously been part of the ecosystem and are thinking about making a return. That is why it's sad to see so many organizations over the last couple of weeks abandon the projects and step away from the circuit, and I hope they come back soon. Let's now turn our attention to the elephant in the room when it comes to women's
What's the elephant, B-Dog?
The sheer level of toxicity that is commonplace towards women within the scene at all levels of play. It's obvious from reading online that the themes of critique and toxicity are pointed towards gender and who you are as an individual, rather than what's happening in the game. Free Clicks Philip made a video on these issues when ESL Impact was first announced, and all of the points he made in that video are still true in the present day. More recently, Zana from Bigger Keeper wrote a statement on X that was worded brilliantly. I would highly recommend going to watch Philip's video and reading Zana's full statement. These will be linked in the description below. The overall goal and mission statement for ESL Impact and the hashtag GG for All campaign is for there to be an environment where discrimination and toxicity is removed. Women's independent leagues are not the final destination, and this is something I know a lot of the pros do not want to be in forever. The goal is to create a competitive space that can exponentially grow these players and develop them so they can be part of a shared competitive ecosystem. Mixed teams would be awesome to see in the top levels of Counter-Strike, and you can see the steps that have been taken in Game Changers to achieve this in Valorant. It is happening right now in front of our very eyes, and that is a point that I think Counter-Strike can get to with time. If you've watched any of the last calendar year of ESL Impact, you'll know firsthand that the level of competition is rising and is growing at such an exponential rate. Season by season, even week on week, it has been amazing watching this development and even watching the journeys of these players and what they've gone through.
So, I agree with the first part, right? I agree with the first part where he's talking about the aspirational element. I've said this a lot. Like, look, people don't like to hear it, but representation does matter, because there are some people are like me. I don't necessarily want to be me when I engage in other activities. So some people view escapism not just as an escape from the world, but an escape from yourself. You get to be somebody else, you know, and that's kind of how I like to approach my games when I play. I don't role play as myself. I role play as a particular type. You know, I even do this in Football Manager, as you've seen. I create a character, I create a persona, and I role play it out, and I do what they would do and not what I would do. Right, that's just how that goes. Indeed, Ricardo Castro's in the chat. So that doesn't apply to everyone. There are many, many people out there who they don't feel they're capable of something until they see somebody that resembles them doing that thing. And then that creates that inspirational element, which goes on to be an aspirational element, which is a snowball effect. That's just the reality. There's data that shows this. So I absolutely agree. The part that I don't necessarily agree with is I think one of the big mistakes that ESL Impact made is the GG for all hashtag and focusing on male toxicity. I don't think that was a good marketing call. I think that actually hindered the league, because what that does is, you know, look, it's water off a duck's back to me if you go, well, you know, you're a chauvinist or whatever. Like, yeah, yawn. I was there in the Gamergate wars, mate. I've fucking been called worse. So I'm fine. But there's a lot of people who it just puts their backs up. It's like, no, I support you, but now what you've done is you've created this confrontational aspect, so go fuck yourself. And a lot of people do react that way if the implication is you're bad, right? You know, and then what they do is they walk it back and go, but we weren't talking about you. Yeah, but it's like, you know, whenever people get upset about the hashtag not all men, there's a reason why people feel compelled to react in that way. And it's because the average person, as far as I'm aware, isn't a sexist, isn't a racist, isn't a homophobe, isn't a bigot. The average person will judge people on their merits, judge people on their personality. And if they'd instead just, you know, you can still use the hashtag GG for all and just cut all of that bullshit about it's not GG until it's GG for all because men are bad. No. It's just, you're just giving fodder to all the MRAs to go, see, it's never enough. And why does that matter? Well, okay, I'm sure you've seen the Bill Burr bit where he's talking about women's basketball and how women's basketball was like, look, we should get as much money as the men and we should do all of this. And that was all of the narrative and that was all of the spin and that was the spiel. And then no one was going to see the games. And then they were like, guys, why don't you buy tickets and bring your family? And they were like, well, I thought this was your thing. I thought this was meant to be your space, so you make it work. You make it work without us. And Bill Burr does this whole bit about it, which is funny because it's Bill Burr, but obviously it has that element of truth to it. The reality is that for ESL Impact to succeed, it needs the male fan in CS to buy into that league and view it as a valid part of the circuit and want to watch it and want to see those stories and want to get to know about those players and understand that maybe one day one of those women's players could be on their team. And if you can get that and without isolating the average CS fan, then you have a much more successful product. So I think focusing on toxicity, unfortunately, was a bit of a faux pas. But again, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's my perspective. I've always maintained that while esports fans are morons, they are fickle morons, and they love drama, I will say, in terms of like bigotry and hatred, it's one of the most welcoming digital spaces I've ever been associated with. I'm a fucking, I grew up as a 4chaner. I've seen the internet, right? I'm an early internet uptaker. I'm a college student looking at rotten.com on college PCs. That's me. Esports is not some bigoted, hostile nightmare, which isn't to say there aren't assholes and bigots and sexists in the space, but by and large, do you think I would have ever met, do you think if I'd stayed a working class, blue collar British guy from a mining community and I never got on the internet, never became a journalist, never got into esports, never traveled, do you think I would know what a fucking furry is? Do you think I would have ever met a trans person? Do you think my worldview would be as like well balanced and reasonable as it is now? Well, no, of course it fucking wouldn't be. So esports, as far as I see from my perspective, is I think it's a good space that really is welcoming, and because it's a digital space, you can check all your baggage at the door if you want to. It's harder for pros. It's certainly harder for pros because you have to have a public profile essentially, and I get that. I'm not unsympathetic to, because it's a very different level of treatment for the trans competitors. But I think overall, it's the toxicity aspect is overblown, which isn't to say every woman won't have experiences. Like, it's like it's not a matter of scale; it's a matter of frequency. I think is a fair way to characterize it based on what I've observed. So, all of which is to say, the women's scene is in a very weird spot in the sense that it's got more eyeballs on it than it's had in a while, particularly because of the VRS. It's got ESL Impact, which is the best league that women have had in CS in the history of esports. But organizations don't seem like they want to support women's teams. And on top of that, women's teams don't seem to be able to be formulated and to find their own spaces and their own opportunities in the same way that mixes for men can. All of which is to say, it's a problem that will probably solve itself one way or another in 2025. And I just hope that it goes the way I want it to go, which is I want ESL Impact to be successful. I want these organizations to keep their women's teams on. And I want I like the idea of women's teams being able to get invites to these male events, because I think on a long enough timescale where that happens, and if we essentially get a co-ed scene where women's teams and men's teams are intermingled, it'll eventually normalize that idea of intergender competition, and then eventually 5 years down the line, we're not talking about it like it's some weird novelty. We're not talking about it in that way. We're simply reminiscing about, where it started and where we're at now. So that was the summary of where we're at. I am going to reach out to people associated with the ESL Impact League. Hopefully our friend of the stream and member of the No Majors Club, Goose Breeder, could get free, and she might want to talk, because I think she'd be an excellent candidate to give her input as a player. So we'll wait and see.